Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out the return of a lesser known but fan favorite model from Zelos. This is their Nova, now in its V2 form. With this V2 comes significant changes from the original, so much so that I actually treat this more like a different model despite the naming convention. However, we'll unpack all of those details as we go through. In the video we're going to have the comparison with 3 of the original versions as well as some other comp watches, and we'll of course check this out across varied lighting, unpack all the details. Before we dive into that though, for admin matters, if you saw that banner, they did send this one into the channel for review, and I always of course want to be transparent about that. This one launches on their website on July 5th of 2024, and I'll of course have a link down the video description. Additionally, in case you missed it and want to check out the packaging, I did already do a candid unboxing of this, so you can go back and check that out as well. Alright, so for the specs, this comes standard with their 1-year warranty, the same as all the other Zelos models. The case, measured from roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, is shrunken from the original by 1mm, coming in at 37mm. The bezel steps down, and this is coming in at 35.5mm. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20mm, and that's a carryover from the original. The lug to lug is a nice compact 43.7mm, so this will really work on any wrist out there as far as sizing wise capability. Now your wrist might be larger and you might not prefer this smaller size. As far as the thickness, this is where the Nova has always really shined, and that has not changed for the second version. This total thickness, including this high box edge sapphire crystal, is only coming in at 8.9mm on my calipers, even thinner than their stated spec. Their spec states 7.2mm without the crystal, so extremely thin there. And as we already saw, this does feature, just like the original, a box edge crystal that is flat on the top there, and it is a sapphire with inner AR coating. As far as the movement, this is what really allows it to maintain that thinness. It is a manual wind movement, and it's a very venerable one at that. Specifically, it's the ETA 7001. For those who aren't familiar with it, it is going to be a manual wind, so of course it's a hand winding movement there. It does not have hacking, however, with being a sub-dial or sub-disc for the hand there, for second hand rather, I find that that's not too big of a problem. The power reserve is around 42 hours, give or take, for that, so not too bad. I would get in the habit of just winding it every day, as is common with manual wind movements. As far as the water resistance, this is reduced from the prior one. This is now coming at 50 meters or 5 atmospheres of water resistance, as opposed to the prior, which was coming in at 100 meters. And then for the weight, on this factory included strap that we'll explore further, this is coming in at 59.5 grams, so extremely light. Between the small size as well as the lightweight, this is one that truly will disappear on the wrist. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper and get a better feel for this, check out some varied footage, all that kind of good stuff. First, for the colors. This is available in 5 different variants. There's the salmon version that we're looking at today. Additionally, there's a 2-color mosaic mother of pearl. There's additionally an aventurine version, which significantly changes up from the original, where it has aventurine in the middle, and then now it has that guilloche on the outside, and we'll check out the original aventurine here shortly. There's additionally a new teal version, which again, we'll check one of those out as well, though this changes up the pattern a lot. And then there's a special edition version that changes up actually the case material, so that is a tantalum case that's a blasted case with a polished tantalum bezel, and then it does have meteorite and aventurine for its dial. But we'll focus mostly on this particular version today because each of these is going to be completely different. With this, you're going to notice one of the biggest claims to fame with this has always been the ornate dials that they have. And this one's no exception. And in fact, they've actually taken it up a notch. This now features, for the first time ever from Zelos, this features CNC machining for its guilloche pattern. So as opposed to past models where it has always been pressed or stamped for that, this is actually CNC milled. And as we'll see across various angles and lighting conditions, this really makes for nice, sharp, crisp, deep lines throughout. But then additionally, you're going to see it really enhances what was already excellent light play that you could see on the other ones. So you get a lot of color shift. Yes, this one has a little bit of a gradient or fume to it, but really that depth of that CNC milling here in this guilloche pattern, you're going to see the light just dances across the dial as we go through different angles in lighting conditions. So that's excellent. As far as the dial layout, this is really hugely changed from the prior one. As you can see, and as we'll see here shortly, the prior one had more like a baton type layout, and it was more of a simplistic dial. This one goes for more of like kind of a modified sector type dial, so you're going to have perimeter rings for your sub dial as well as for your main. Then you're going to have on the outside edge as well, and then numerals applied as well. And we'll explore all of these details further. And those polished rings really do change up the look, as does the numerals and handset change as well. Additionally, though, you're going to notice that it doesn't stop there. At the 6 o'clock position, you can actually see, as opposed to their normal logo at the 12 o'clock, they've changed up both the style and location and have that incorporated into the rings at the 6 o'clock position. When you look at this dial pattern, you're going to see on this particular one, which this is unique to this salmon, with this ornate guilloche, it does change up at the sub dial. So I think that's a great touch there. So as opposed to the original one where that was actually recessed down in, this is now broken with rings, and they really do differentiate that not just with the rings, but with the pattern as well. So that really does give that sub dial feel as opposed to just a second hand that's tacked on at the 6 o'clock position. As you move out to the edge, it's much more subtle, but this does have a chapter ring on it, so you are going to have precision legibility. Actually, it does have, as we'll see, both studs, and then in between, one of the things that's really neat is it has actually the Pics for your guilloche have dots on them, and those are at 1 minute increments there. So you do have that precision legibility still, and that's a really cool touch. With this box edge, certainly it is hidden a little bit, and certainly it's subtly incorporated into the overall pattern, but I think it actually works well and haven't had any problems with legibility. That was a really cool touch, and I was excited to see that one. Shifting over to the hardware, this is another area where there is a dramatic change. The handset is completely different. This handset style is a little hard to pin down. I'd put it somewhere between like a Dauphine, a Sword, or an Alpha type handset. You're going to notice it has a traditional Dauphine or Lance type profile, and it does have the Dauphine faceted crease down the middle, but then you can see towards the base, it does kind of taper, and then it flares back out and goes to a traditional Dauphine type tip. With that faceting and the high polish, you're going to see that there's a lot of light play that you'll get throughout. So while this is an uncolored version, and certainly it can, as we'll see, wash out on this dial, especially when you're in indoor lighting like this, it does, I find, have decent legibility, but we'll talk about that more as we go through. When we shift over to the second hand, you can see that this really changes up not only the style, but additionally, though, that one is flat, so it does not have any faceting. It is still going to be polished, though. That's a little more of an ornate kind of patterning for that one. When you look at the back to the minute and hour hand, you can see that the pinion is capless, so there is kind of a hole in the middle of the dial. I don't think it looks bad at all. I wouldn't have minded if they put a pinion cap on the top, but I think this is pretty clean the way that they did it there. And then as we shift out and already saw, this does have numerals applied. So you can see that going around the perimeter, instead of having traditional indexes, this does have applied numerals. Those are going to be polished as well. Again, on the smaller dial, these are relatively small, and especially in indoor lighting, they do tend to kind of wash out. However, as we move it across other lighting conditions, I think they pick up pretty well, and I also think they're fairly proportionate, especially with everything that's already going on with this dial. It would have been extremely busy if it's not already busy of a dial pattern as is. I know some people already have that sense for it. Shifting over to the bezel on this, just like with the predecessor, is going to be a fixed bezel, and as we already looked at, it is set back. In this instance, it is going to be a full polish. What does carry over is it does still have that kind of complex angle to it, so you can see that it has a ledge, then a chamfer cut, and then flattens out to get towards that crystal. As far as the case itself, this is going to be very similar in terms of patterning to the original one. However, it has a very different look, and that's primarily owing to the fact that, much like the rest of this watch, this is now full polish, whereas in the past, and we'll see, this was primarily going to be brushing with polished accents. But one of the things that you're not going to miss is this is still incredibly thin. Putting that next to my finger gives you a little bit of an idea, and we'll look at it on wrist and things here as well to give you a better sense. But this case is extremely thin, and that's one of the reasons why it wears as well as it does, and it does wear beautifully. It does have subtly downturned lugs, though as you can see, with such a tucked case back, it really doesn't need to downturn too much, so I think that's sufficient for what it is. The lugs themselves are going to continue through with those angular cuts like they had on the original. Yes, it does lose a little bit of that accent in touch because of the full polish. However, the lines themselves, the actual milling, the machining, is still very sharp and crisp. It's just kind of that visual because of the light play for it. It does take away a little bit of that effect, but I find that it's still there, and it's still a very interesting looking case shape that's unique to this particular watch. In between the lugs, one of the things that's a very welcome change is on the past version, it actually cut into straps, including the factory included strap. You can see when you look down in there, this does now have a pretty significant undercut for that, which that relief cut gives the ability to move around without catching, even with a thicker padded strap there. So you shouldn't have the issues that you did of the original with that cutting into your fancy straps if you choose to swap this one around. As far as the crown side, you can see that this does not have an integrated crown guard, which of course I think is in keeping with the dress styling of this particular version. As far as the crown itself, this is coming in at 5.4 millimeters. As you'd expect for a manual wind watch, this is just going to be a push-pull configuration, so not a screw-down crown. It does have a coin edge, which I think is in keeping with a traditional dress-style watch, and it is, as you can expect with this one, it is full polish, but it does have their signature on the outside of that as well. Shifting over to the case back. The case back for this is still going to be a screw-in construction. It does feature keyholes, which I always think that's a nice incorporation of the screw-in type of case back construction. Additionally, it does have an exhibition window in the middle, which showcases that 7001 movement. As you can see, this particular one has Geneva striping, has nice blued accents, all of those kind of things. It's a pretty nice movement to look at. Not the fanciest that I've ever seen, but it's pretty nice overall. Not too bad to flip that around for when you're taking a look. One of the biggest things, though, is this does add virtually zero thickness to the overall profile of the watch, and that's part of how it tucks and nests so nicely onto the wrist. So despite the fact that the actual specs are extremely thin, it wears as thin or thinner because it just melts into your wrist, and that's fantastic. I loved it with the original, and I still love that now. Shifting over to the strap. Here you can see it on my 6.5-inch wrist to get an idea as to how this wears. I personally think for a dress style watch, this still has plenty of presence, especially on smaller wrists, or if you are accustomed to wearing smaller watches. By modern standards, those with larger wrists, I do expect it's going to take some adjustment. However, there's a reason why vintage watches, and it was not uncommon for them to be on the smaller side, actually even smaller than this one coming at 37 millimeters. So personally, I think that this still has plenty of range, but I can understand that this won't necessarily be for everyone. The factory included strap is just a flat or smooth slab Horween leather strap. This one is black leather here. It does have some stitching accents towards the lugs as well as out at the tip on the non-buckle side. It is going to be measured 28 millimeters at the lugs, and it does taper down to 18 millimeters. It has a custom buckle, which is going to be true for pretty much every Zelos out there. It's a little bit of a chunky style. It's more reminiscent of what I would expect on a dive watch than a dress watch, but I think it works well enough for this. And then on the back, it does have quick release spring bars, so it's easy to change it around. And speaking of changing it around, let's go ahead and check this out on a couple different straps. Here you can see with a blue textured strap, this one's actually borrowed from a Wise that we'll check out here momentarily. And I think that texture, as well as I think the blue color, for me at least, works fairly well for something different with that salmon. But really, I think the texture is what elevates it. I feel like it needs it. Yes, there's a lot going on with the dial texture, but I do think it still complements it nicely. And then next, shifting it up, here it is on a distressed gray strap. This one's actually from a Martin design that we checked out previously. And I think the gray actually works really well. It's a little more of a neutral look. Certainly the distress might not be the best for dressy occasions, but I think it works well depending on what you're going for. But the gray coloration, I think, does complement the salmon color dial nicely. So that's a good touch. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch itself, let's go ahead and bring in some comps that we've alluded to throughout. All right, so one of the biggest things you're going to notice here with the V1, and this is the teal Nova one, the original Nova. So with this, you can see this is actually the stock bracelet. Unfortunately, they no longer have a bracelet option available for the V2, but this gives you an idea there. And then additionally, you can see just an idea as far as sizing, that 38 millimeters versus 37. I think it actually looks even more dramatic as far as the change in dial presence with that different layout for this. But let me know what you think. And then as far as the patterning, this is completely different than the new Guilloche for their teal, but that gives you an idea as far as the coloration and kind of what to expect there. I will miss this bracelet, and we'll come back to that one. All right, so here it is next. You can see next to the aventurine. And with this aventurine, certainly this isn't the best lighting or best condition to get that full aventurescence for that twinkle effect. But you can see, though, just the simplistic layout of just the baton type layout. It's much more of a clean dial, traditional logo placement, those kinds of things. And then a much more of a traditional kind of stick handset for that as well. So really a very dramatic difference in the look. And then next up, let's go ahead and check out, here it is next to their original meteorite, which this one featured blued hardware. I think that blue hardware could have possibly worked on this, and we'll come back to that. But main thing I want to check out with this one, let's go ahead and just look at the case difference. You can see how dramatic of a difference it makes with going from that brush on this, where it does have the polished accents, to going to that full polish. It really changes up the look and dynamic. Especially look at those lugs. Look at how much more dramatic the cut lines are with that. You can really see those sharp cuts, as opposed to this, while they are still sharp cuts, they do blend a little more. And then changing it up, to give an idea as far as the color, here it is next to their Comet, the Zelos Comet. And then this gives you an idea as far as sizing. This one, I believe, is 39 millimeters, if I recall correctly offhand, somewhere in that ballpark, 39, 40. But this gives you an idea as far as the color difference. You can see this is much more of a traditional salmon color. This is much more of like a coppery salmon, and it really shifts a lot, as we've seen throughout in varied lighting. And then here it is, next to bring in a Wise. This is the one that I referenced earlier. This is the AD773. And you can see this is definitely has a lot more presence. This one actually possibly too much so. It has that Grand Seiko type case, so you have some more case presence, but just the dial alone, this one at 39 millimeters and with a thin outer case presence, you can see that 37 versus 39. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic difference with these two, but this one possibly wears a bit large. So I would have probably preferred this to be a 38, maybe even a 37 for it, but I do think that gives you an idea, though, as far as sizing of what to expect. Alright, so now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, critiques, as well as the summary. First, for the positives. The guilloche on this, I've got to say, it is absolutely beautiful. I loved the guilloche on the original. However, this one just really enhances that. With having that deep milled CNC type of a patterning, as well as I like the better gradation that this has in light shift compared to the original. The original was a little closer to that Comet in color, and I did think it was a little bit flat, and especially for my fair complexion, I think it just kind of washed out against the skin, or would have washed out against the skin. One of the things I love that carried through, this, just like the original one, is exceptionally thin. And what between that thinness as well as the lightweight, this thing is so comfortable on the wrist and just completely disappears. It is a true pleasure to wear, and there's a reason why I own 3 of the originals and wear them a heck of a lot. Additionally, the components in this are excellent. The ETA 7001, that movement has so much history behind it, great reliability, all those kind of things, nothing to complain about there. The same thing is true of, I think you get excellent finishing for the money, which, speaking of the money, I personally think this is a very solid value. This launches starting at only $750. That's for this variant, and as well as the teal. Then they bump up to $800. The big one that you're going to see as far as the big jump is going to that tantalum. That one came in even higher than expected, and that's actually coming in at $2,000. So huge price jump for it. However, you're not going to find, at least that I've ever seen, tantalum out there much in the market at all, but especially that polished tantalum bezel. So if that's your thing, certainly I think it still is competitively priced, but really I think this is going to be a sweet spot for most people looking for a nice dress watch in that $750 to $800 territory, and I think you get a lot for the money. But what about critiques? You know, there's going to be, these are largely preference based, but there's going to be several things that I have. First, for that polish. I mentioned in the unboxing I wasn't sure how I'd feel about it, and I will say, it's been nice to wear on wrist. I don't notice it that much as far as the polish, but personally I do still prefer the original. Not just because of the aesthetic, but I do prefer some of the things that come with that polish. As we've already talked about, I do think it breaks up and accents the lines more, so I think it actually highlights some of the strengths of this particular watch better. Additionally, I think it makes you appreciate those polished accents more when they're just that, accents, as opposed to full polish. But additionally though, you're not going to have the fingerprint magnet. I've been very consciously trying not to touch the case throughout this video, because this thing, I mean, anywhere you touch, you're going to get oil, you're going to get fingerprints. I wiped this down with rubbing alcohol with a microfiber cloth, just trying to make sure that I kept it looking fairly clean, though I'm sure they're still going to pick up plenty of stuff. And then just finally, the look. I do aesthetically prefer the brushing. The dial layout, that's another one. I liked the simplicity and cleanness, especially for a dress style watch of the original. This leans more into like that Swiss independent styling, which isn't necessarily hugely my cup of tea. I like it. I think it looks good, but if I were to pick one, I'm going to lean towards the original one as far as stylistically. It's more fitting to my personal taste. As far as the legibility, we've talked about this and gone throughout. The legibility, certainly, there's no denying. It does tend to wash out for it. However, on this particular version at least. However, I do think it is plenty legible. I don't want to create an inaccurate picture, which is to say there's never been any time that I couldn't tell the time with ease. But if you're looking for the handsets, if you're trying to capture that, certainly it does kind of tend to blend in. I do think they could have gone with like a gunmetal finishing for this. Certainly, it might have taken away from some of the dress aesthetic. But a polished gunmetal I still think would have looked good and would have possibly added a little more contrast. And they could have also gone with like the blued like we looked at on that meteorite. But personally, I think the gunmetal would have been a little more neutral. The lack of bracelet, with this polished case, I understand. Additionally, they weren't enamored with the styling, but that styling or that fit and comfort of the original bracelet was excellent. I just always love having a bracelet option available. So I know that might not be something that bothers everybody, but I do miss having that option available. As you saw, 2 of them aren't even on a bracelet right now, but it's still nice to have that option. And then finally, the strap. I've seen other people comment on this as well, and this is nothing new. This slab strap I don't think does any favors for it. Not saying it's not a quality strap, it's not my thing personally. However, I just don't think it fits the overall looks, but with those quick release spring bars, it's so easy to change that around. So very minor thing, but it is something I did want to mention. So where does that leave us? At the end of the day, while this is a huge departure from the original model, which I absolutely loved, this is one that I still do appreciate the fact that they have that willingness to change, to try new things, and to really keep this from generationally. I don't think there's anybody who has the original that's going to feel like they missed out and need to get this new one. And really, actually, to that same end, I don't necessarily know that the target market or target buyers are going to be the people who love the original. I don't necessarily know that this will appeal, and conversely, the original might have been a little too simplistic and plain for people that this would appeal to. So I think it's a good option out there, and especially for fitment, for the overall money, I think you get a lot of watch for the price. So let me know what you think. Do you like this one? Do you prefer the original one like me? If you do like this one, which one's your favorite? All that kind of good stuff. Drop a comment. Finally, if you haven't done so, tap that like button if you enjoyed this, and always tap that subscribe button. Stay tuned for new content, and thanks for watching.